Curtis?
Hey, Diane, truly, thank you for, for doing what you've done, and thank you for having me. It's, I talked about that today actually on social media, when people were poking a little bit of fun at this, and I said, isn't it amazing that, this Stay in the Truth in this small group is stepping up on their shoestring budget where others are not.
Well, I'm all my life looking for answers, and I found a lot of them through you, and so I'm morally obligated. I'm obligated as a natural health professional, and I'm obligated because of my personal health history. So you've done just phenomenal in meeting the needs of so many people through your work the last 5 years. We're all in tremendous gratitude for what you're doing for us. Thank you so much, Curtis.
No, the important part about what you just said, and again, I appreciate that, but I would just take that as a, thank you for doing my job. And I just didn't realize we had any options otherwise. And quite frankly, with a science background and all of those issues, you don't have an option. You have to do your job.
Are we ready to start the questions?
Anytime you want to go, I'm ready to talk about anything. There's no such thing here. Here's what's really important to remember, too. Some people get intimidated thinking, questions aren't relevant. There is no such thing as a dumb question. And people have questions. Some of them might seem a little funny. It doesn't make any difference. They need to be answered for all reasons in the world. And again, I'd say this. We're very careful with EMFs as electrical professionals. Here's what people need to understand with this, where, you'll get people saying that, here, Curtis is just an electrician. There's a famous little character out there that just says, oh, Curtis the electrician. And what people need to understand is this. When our backgrounds electrically, it would just bore people to tears to see how absolutely scientific it is, and that, when we learn and get our electrical apprenticeship going, doing those things, we study everything on the periodic table and everything in existence because of its electrical capabilities. So here's an example when it came to the radio frequency issue, when they said, Curtis, you're not qualified. Well, we use a 60 hertz electromagnetic field to generate and produce electricity in North America. In Europe, we'll use a 50 hertz electromagnetic field to generate electricity, and for electricity in businesses and homes and otherwise. Well, radio frequency EMFs are simply an electrical circuit specific to communications, but it's an electrical circuit. And that's why that has to be done very carefully through wired processes, because as electrical professionals, we're extremely careful not to put people inside electromagnetic fields because you're going to hurt them. You can have adverse health effects. You can have building problems. You can have real electrical problems associated with even extremely low frequencies interacting with anything.
Right. So what I've found is that your work is significantly different from everyone else's, and at the same time it supports the medical professionals and the scientists who are starting to grasp the depth of what you do, but you're just leaps and bounds ahead of them.
Well, and here's what I would say. I wouldn't say leaps and bounds ahead of them, and here's why. Listen, I've got, three different science backgrounds. One is, I'm an interprovincial journeyman electrician, which is the governments of Canada, the government of Canada, and all the provinces and Industry Canada trained and certified one profession to install, to design, to install, to troubleshoot, and maintain the electricity that utilities produce, and that's called electricians. Across the board, electrical engineers are not qualified to do the job that we do. We do that work to those design standards. And electricians are not all people that are going to the Home Depots and buying something and, doing some very simplistic electrical work. My own background is heavy industrial, oil field, mines, mills, explosion-proof, onshore, offshore. We've done some amazing work all over the place, but that also includes a lot of maintenance and keeping people safe with this. Now, my second background is I'm a building construction engineering technologist, and the reason I did that specifically is because I didn't want to become an electrical engineer with a second education. I didn't want to take an electrical engineering technology and just double up on my electrical background. As a building construction engineering technologist, it's every aspect of construction from contracts to completion. And that's designing buildings, professional estimation. It's an amazingly versatile program where we have a common background with civil engineers, mechanical engineers, architects. We all start out with that very basic same background before we go into our areas of a speciality. Now, the third background of mine is really interesting because even at the time I never really understood the significance of it. You know, it's a thermal radiation consultant. And what that means is this. Even my electrical background and my building engineering background, temperature is a critical component of design of anything. It doesn't matter what it is, and here's an example. Everybody knows that space shuttle that blew up. Here's a problem. It was a colder, it's reported that there was a colder night the night before, and the O-ring or the gasket shrunk. So the rocket booster, you know, that's what caused that rocket booster to fail and blow up. So, you know, buildings can fail because they're carrying too much. And the point with this is temperature is a critical component, but we calculate for it. We couldn't, even though we designed energy systems, even though with buildings we designed energy systems, we couldn't see how they were functioning. So I did my double science background to complement an extensive application background, you know, blessed to participate in the pioneering of infrared technology, which is seeing temperature beyond our visible spectrum. And that started for me back in 1979, where we would literally do cold calls to refineries or gas plants and say, we can help you find your electrical problems. And they would say, well, no, you can't. And we would say, yes, we can. So it's just a heat issue. So we would isolate that and show them how we could save them money, and we literally built on those applications from there with the help of engineers, where then they would ask us to look at refractory vessels, boilers. Here's an example of this. Petro-Canada retained us years ago to monitor one vessel for a year, and that was at a cost of $80,000. But they got to run that vessel for a year longer and without it blowing up and get that extra production out of it. So imagine you roll it into medicine. With injury or infection, there's inflammation. But medicine is effectively blind to temperature. So having that background and seeing temperature has just been a humbling experience for me because, you know, we've been asked to participate in work that has just never been done before and to give sight to professionals. We're not superheroes. Contrary to some popular belief, we do not use capes or do those types of things. If we're working for, here's an example of this. In 1991, you know, I was managing an infrared company in Edmonton, and the City of Edmonton city manager contacted me and said, you know, we want to retain you to work with our fire department to implement infrared. And he said, they already don't like you because these are hard-working men that have been fighting fires for a long time. And what my job was, and with our technical support, was to go in there and simply show them we could give them sight through smoke, that we could help them get the job done better, faster, without telling them how to do their jobs. So taking it further, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and here I am, a technical biological dummy, that way, is forestry and hydrology, and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans contacted us and said, you saw groundwater from the air. And I said, what's the big deal? Well, I didn't know groundwater is considered nature's hidden treasure. This is where fish spawn. You know, these are these groundwater upwellings within river systems. And they said, we've tried to see it, and we can't see it. We've tried to actually duplicate your work, and we couldn't do it. And the thing is, the application exceeded their expertise. So for me to have a background electrically with electron flow, magnetic fields, electromagnetic fields, and then an engineering background as well, and then that 35-year radiation background. And we've taken that to the point now where we've actually advanced thermography into accredited medical education for education credits medical professionals require for ongoing medical licensing. But really importantly, we're not lobbyists of any particular kind. We are codes and standards. Even when we do building inspections, people don't want to hear any personal opinions. They want to hear even an energy issue, emissions issue, but they want it drawn into building code so that you can give them a code rule so they can take that forward and represent that. So it's a humbling job, and with all the required humility, we employ the most advanced infrared in the world without exception. And an example of that is, I think in 2003, you guys in Ontario especially had the respiratory problem with the SARS virus. Well, here the government was looking for infrared consultants and companies to use equipment at two airports, Pearson and Vancouver Airport. And they wanted that done for a year's time, and they wanted to actually catch people coming off the planes with a flu. Well, this is one time Public Works, actually did their job where they wanted to get this done cheap and quick. So our bid was $1 million to do that. And Public Works came forward and said, anybody who gives us the technology for nothing will have a benefit here. So the infrared equipment manufacturers stepped up. Now, when they stepped up, here's what we even said at that time. I said, the imaging application is going to exceed your expertise because you have to have an imaging application. You have to know how to get this done. And the bottom line is, unfortunately, that between the SARS flu virus and H1N1 and Ebola, the infrared community has imaged hundreds of millions of people at ports of entry and didn't produce one image of a flu. I actually had to meet with Health Canada in Vancouver at the Vancouver airport and their team and explain to them why the infrared industry failed. And it was just simple to say that, just because you work for Boeing doesn't mean you know how to fly a plane. They said we pulled people off planes, and they said they have a flu, and they couldn't provide that required information because even such things as solar EMFs, we get back to that dangerous issue, can heat up skin in under a minute. So you're going to change thermal signatures. So, and again, something important for us is, people will say, I know somebody who has infrared or I know somebody who does this, and with just respect for intent. Temperature for us starts at minus 273 degrees Celsius or minus 496 degrees Fahrenheit. Everything is considered dead. It's called absolute zero. There's no electron excitation. There's nothing moving. And anything above that temperature, you start to get a little bit of electron excitation and temperature. So temperature for us starts there. And when you want to bring that into our radio frequency EMF issue, you hear the codes always say non-thermal effects aren't understood. There are no such things as non-thermal effects. Right. Everything is thermal. That's why you have to be very careful, because the very basics of anything is EMFs interacting with anything are going to cause excitation. And keeping this pretty simple, too, for people is that it's hard to understand, and even for me with my education, it was just a humbling thing because, I think I was a little bit denser, more stubborn than the rest. But everything in existence is electrical. It doesn't matter whether it's a chair, a table, a cardboard box, your cat, your dog, your kids, your TV. Every atom and molecule and everything on the periodic table is electrical. Some are conductors, semiconductors, and the others are insulators. So then again, it's just a very complex issue, but I'm humbled with that work that we've done over a long period of time and with an incredible team, including a medical team for the early detection of breast cancers, the early detection of other cancers, working on difficult diagnosis where you're just simply giving medicine sight of their objectives. We don't tell them what to do as medical professionals. That's their area of expertise. We're supplying that non-invasive radiology.
Right. Okay.
Isn't that a mouthful?
Yes. Okay. Now that takes care of question 2 here that I had down too.
That's okay.
Okay. Let's go to what happened today with an announcement from the Ontario Clean Air Alliance. They're pretty much on board with the provincial government, Kathleen Wynne, and signing a deal with Quebec to bring over hydropower. Yet they're still missing significant energy efficiency. What could we do about that?
Well, this actually brings us into the radio frequency issue. And again, it's really important for people to know that, as the government's codes and standards, when people ask me something and they'll say, where's the code rule? You have to give them the code rule. where the code rule will say you may, you shall, you cannot, whatever. But we all know this. When we all buy homes or buildings, building code compliance is required, or you're just not going to get a mortgage. Lenders, banks, everybody, they want to protect their investment. Insurers want to, keep their costs down. So compliance with code is critically important. But at the end of the day, and this is prior to, the early 2000s, we would sign off buildings as compliant with code because we're blind. So when you think of Sandy as an architect in New York, architects, everybody involved, we would do our job, but at the end of the day, we signed buildings off as compliant and we accepted responsibility, but it was never verified. When we were actually asked to look at buildings, now this is going to also roll into the smart meter issue and the radio frequency issue. And again, we're not picking on anybody with this. Everybody has to own what they did or did not do. But here's an example of this. When they asked us to look at buildings and how buildings were using energy, well, and again with this technology that is so accurate, and here's an example of that. When forestry tested us on the accuracy of this technology, we were within 1/10 of a degree imaging moving water from the air in a moving helicopter. So, and that was just a thrill to me because I didn't know how accurate we would be. You had to put in all those parameters. There's so much to consider. So when they asked us to look at buildings, well, here's something that's really important to people. Buildings and their energy use starts with Environment Canada. Environment Canada passes on what they call regional climatic data and seismic data. Now, the difference is that, in Inuvik, our temperature extremes are different than the desert or the southern areas. So here's an example, and I'll use, the Okanagan. Environment Canada Meteorological Services passes on this climatic data. This is building design temperature so that we blend in with nature. We're not supposed to impose on the atmosphere. We're not supposed to heat the atmosphere because the atmosphere is basically cold and warm air with water vapor. So the whole thing is don't heat it, because if you heat that atmosphere, once you generate heat, you can't destroy that heat. So when we looked at buildings, it was an absolute shock to me to see that here's the Okanagan. The building code says this. We use -20 Celsius or -4 degrees Fahrenheit to simulate the coldest time of the year. We'll use +33 Celsius or +95 Fahrenheit to simulate the hottest time of the year. And then we'll insulate the building to accommodate that load. We'll build the building to accommodate that load. We'll put in the energy systems, their energy use, to accommodate that load. Now, the back of the code in the appendix also says this. Now, here's the thing is, this is a code rule across Canada. It's a code rule, it's 1.1.3 point, and it's called climatic and seismic data. It goes all the way across the country. So when we saw that design temperature and they asked me to look at buildings, well, I had to look at this because that is my area of expertise as well. So when they brought the information to me, it was alarming because the back of the code says, watch out for solar EMFs. Watch out for that same solar radiation that burns our skin. And the reason is this. Have you ever seen whitewashed buildings in Europe? They're white, and they reflect solar radiation. So those buildings in Greece or on those islands, the EMFs don't get to interact with that building and generate any heat, so they don't use air conditioning. So when we started looking at, and it's beautiful because we'll either shade a building, we want to shade it, you want to protect it, but we've got to be very careful about using high emissivity or very absorbent finishes on the exterior of buildings because buildings have a design function, as I've just said to you here. Now, here's what was really shocking is when we looked at buildings that, imagine this, here's a building that we had worked on, and originally it was white. And it had stucco on it that was reflecting solar radiation, and then they painted it dark colors. Well, here's an example in the Okanagan. The warmest temperature we've documented on the outside of a building is 94 degrees Celsius when it's designed for 33, according to code. Mm-hmm. Now, 100 is boiling. So that's 204 degrees Fahrenheit when here's the UN worried about that those atmospheric temperatures. And then to take this further, we ended up imaging buildings in 7 provinces and 26 states to see what was going on with buildings. And as a rule, across the country and throughout the states, buildings were grossly exceeding their design temperatures and generating extreme heat. Now, our job is this. We had to report that to and through our authority having jurisdiction. So here's an example in the Okanagan area. We report that to the city. At that time here, we're reporting it to the city of Kelowna. Now, the city of Kelowna and their management, from there we report it to the provincial governments. And after that, we report it to the federal government, which is, now that's, Mr. Harper and that group. Well, their job is we're looking for a code ruling and we're reporting something. And their job is to do something with that information. Here's the unfortunate part. The city of Kelowna, even though wonderful, wonderful Mayor Sharon Shepherd and Councilwoman Shepherd referred us to their bylaw enforcement guys specific to the code rule, their management got defensive about it and said, imagine a city manager saying to me, Curtis, you make our management feel defensive when we're just reporting something that couldn't be seen before. So unfortunately, that was ignored at that level, that here are buildings grossly exceeding those design temperatures. And here's an example even for a building I owned. Mm-hmm. Air conditioning is refrigeration.
Right.
It's not air conditioning. Air conditioning is refrigeration, and it wasn't until I was inspecting a building and we had some coolers in another business where I said to the guy, I said, that's refrigeration. And he said, yes. And I said, why would we put refrigeration and heating in a building? And then when you find out that building is, grossly exceeding design temperatures and sometimes close to boiling temperature, once the exterior of that building generates that heat transfers back inside the buildings where people go, boy, are we ever hot in here. It's so hot in here. And that heat also radiates atmospherically where you're changing atmospheric temperatures and there will be climate change. There will be weather severity. What's going on in California, it really just makes me sad to look at letters and documents we provided to the Canadian government, in 2007, 2008, saying you're going to have droughts and weather severity and more intense forest fires as a result of this. And then you look at what's going on today. Well, here's the sad part. And again, we're not blaming Mr. Harper. He's just going to have to, take responsibility for this. But this was reported to Mr. Harper for all particular reasons, not just because the United Nations members were looking for this information. The United Nations has put aside a reported $700 billion because they're worried about a 7-degree Fahrenheit rise in temperature, doing horrible things globally because we all share one atmosphere, regardless of protecting our borders. Well, we're documenting building skin temperatures that are over 100 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than that. And you can imagine this, even on my own building. Here's air conditioning. Now, if you go to your air conditioning spec plate and you look at it and you look at the volts times the amps, my little rinky-dinky air conditioning was using the equivalent of 3,000, and this is a small one, 3,000 watts per hour. So that's the equivalent of 30 100-watt light bulbs working 24/7 trying to accommodate this heat that's coming from the outside and generating inside. And the thermostat is so far away that it never shut off. So the AC was running full time. So you've got a generator. You've got, it doesn't matter, if it's coal-fired generating stations. You've got people burning coal trying to create that wattage. So when you hear places like, and here's what's going on, here's why I like when you talk about the Clean Alliance. Mr. Harper and these guys, if they would have taken this information back in the early 2000s and used this information, it would have put a lot of people to work addressing these building problems with the exterior skin temperatures and buildings being so absorbent. But they just didn't do their jobs. So they didn't pass it on to anybody. They didn't do anything. So we kept using more air conditioning, reacting to the symptoms. And now you've got energy companies, and here's where they have to get their due, is that you've got energy companies that are being told to reinvent the wheel because we need more energy. When you've heard of Ontario having brownouts and power outages and Alberta having power outages and the demand everywhere, imagine that the bigger percentage of that is reacting to the symptoms of solar radiation. and that could be stopped with a low E product. And again, we've got the trades and the skills to do that. We couldn't see that before. So here's the thing with the Clean Alliance, that we're just preparing for them today. And unfortunately, Mr. Harper should have taken this forward to them in Quebec. They could deal with their building issues and knock billions and billions and billions of watts off the grid immediately, and eliminating those emissions associated with that, and stopping that heat while employing thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of people globally to address this issue. And those are tax-paying dollars. It would knock the electrical load off those grids where you don't have Ontario going, we need to go nuclear. We need more energy. We have to do this. We need more energy, and more and more and more. Well, this would have taken care of all of that, and still can, quite frankly. Now, here's the sad reality when governments don't listen to us, because we're the science behind policy, and policy is based on science, not politics. Policy is based on science, not the other way around. So here's that horrible thing that goes with that. Now, Mr. Harper and these guys, when we passed this through our MLA, Norm Letnick, we passed this through Gordon Campbell, who, quite frankly, is just disgraceful what he did with this information, which was nothing, and didn't pass this on to anybody. So they don't pass that on even to the federal government. Nobody shared that information. So when it came down to these energy issues, every industry goes, listen, we've got to do something, and we've got to do something in a hurry. Well, guess what they did? That's the purpose of smart meters, is we've got these real problems with energy. But what they didn't understand is this. Deploying wireless smart meters to address energy issues we couldn't see isn't going to catch 1 watt of energy at all. It's not going to save anything. And to go wireless on the issue, you've just created a lot of complex issue, because, one, you've got exposure codes. These are human exposure codes. And they've used a human exposure code to bypass building code. They've used a human exposure code to bypass, academia across the board, because they think we're going to save this energy instead of we're not addressing any of it. And to top it off, when I talked about, EMFs causing excitation of atmospheric molecules. We know our atmosphere is made of oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, whatever else is up there. These are all electrical. So, and here's an example with this. When they did exposure codes related to even smart meters, they only considered the specific absorption rate, only considered the meter as an end-use device. They left out the grid. They left out the antennas. They left out the Wi-Fi routers in classrooms. And you can't do that, because that's like testing a toaster that's not plugged in. And here's an example of this. When I cross-examined Fortis BC's, experts on smart meters and the applicability of their smart meter program, the engineer said, we take exception to what you're saying, that, we're going to radiate people and hurt them, and we're going to do this. I said, can you be 10 feet away from the meter and be safe from it? He said, you can be 20 centimeters away from the meter and be safe. And I said, are you going to cover 17,000 square kilometers with those highly penetrating frequencies to communicate with smart meters? Yes. And to find out that the range of the one antenna inside the smart meter is 3 kilometers, 3,000 meters, the equivalent of 1.8 miles. Now, leaving out that grid might have seemed a good idea politically, but you have to technically incorporate it, because here's an example of this. To get people that show us pacemaker manufacturer specifications where people have got a pacemaker. Imagine even here's a woman that has had a pacemaker for 30 years of her life, and she goes to Fortis BC, and she's genuinely worried, and she has every right to worry, because Fortis said, listen, this isn't going to hurt you, otherwise people would be dropping dead. That's these people talking ridiculous. Well, here's an example. Their pacemaker manufacturer specs tell them to stay 2 feet away from an induction oven. But here's Fortis admitting under cross-examination that they're going to induce 3,000 meters, or over 9,800 square feet. So you're going to trigger pacemakers. You're going to cause that electrical interference. And when we talk about electrical interference, people have to remember this. Everybody's got cable TV, or if you've got a modem at home and you've got that coaxial cable plugged into that modem, there's a very thin wire in there, and it's amazing. Here's what the communications industry uses with that very thin wire, is that cable is shielded to protect from electromagnetic interference or radio frequency EMFs. The saddest part is that we never considered humans and how delicate they are and the electromagnetic interference with them. So Mr. Harper and these guys could have done amazing things. Instead, unfortunately, what's happening again, they're going to have to answer for what they've done. They've mass installed smart meters, 4.8 million in Ontario, as an example. Well, one, they mass installed them, meaning electricians would never mass install meters, because you've got meter bases that have never been electrically maintained. You've got connections in there that have never been maintained. And electrical connections are the biggest problem with industry. And here's an example. We would consult for Syncrude, Suncor, Esso, Petro-Canada, Dow Chemical, Sherritt Gordon's, and multi-billion-dollar processes, mines, mills, et cetera, and we isolate these electrical connections and these problems and work with their professionals so they can fix it. And we were so accurate that they would actually schedule shutdowns based on our reporting, and their insurers would say, listen, you need to incorporate this technology into this. Now, so you imagine with Ontario, and here's a real example. Ontario's got 4.8 million meters installed, and every one of those buildings is off the market now. You can't sell them. You can't legally sell them. You've got connection problems. On top of that, now you've smothered parts of Ontario with radio frequency EMFs where these highly penetrating frequencies are going through walls, okay, and they're causing some serious problems where, again, here's a code issue. We're very careful with EMFs and what they interact with because they can induce currents, cause vibrations. And there's a building code rule across Canada, 4.1.3.6, and it's called vibration. We design a building for vibrations. If you're going to be having a dance studio and a bunch of people jumping, if you're going to be doing special work there, engineers, you can imagine this now with seismic activity. Look at the amazing work that engineers do, in California, where these buildings before would fall down, but they actually designed the building to move with those vibrations, and so we avoided that. But when you talk about this and with what the Clean Alliance is capable of is that you could just remove that from the grid immediately and address those energy issues for real, creating a huge tax-paying economy. When it comes to Wi-Fi in schools, here's what's important with Wi-Fi in schools. It was in 2010 when we first started hearing it. As a matter of fact, we hear about Wi-Fi in schools, and it was actually Simcoe County in Ontario, where CBC was reporting that people were being hurt. Parents and teachers, or parents, teachers, and students were effectively being laughed off and saying it's ridiculous. These frequencies can't hurt you. Well, our job at first was to take a look at this, and here's what we do. We look for a code rule. We don't have personal opinions. So to look for a code rule that says this, but I'll tell you this. As soon as I even said to them, I said, what is Wi-Fi? And they said, you don't know? And I said, no. And they said, Curtis, they're putting routers in the classroom, and, that saves on money because we don't have to wire computer stations. So we're putting these routers in the classroom, and we're just going to bathe the room in these frequencies to communicate with laptops. And as soon as they said that, I said, you can't do that. You're going to put children and teachers inside an electrical circuit where they're going to be part of that electrical circuit. And radio frequency EMFs, it's electromagnetic radiation used for electromagnetic induction. So here's what was done in 2010. We're not to beat up on anybody. We contact Health Canada and say, where's your exposure code related to limits of human exposure to these? And they say it's Safety Code 6, 2009. To look at Safety Code 6, 2009, the language was immediately alarming because they said the purpose of the code is to protect the public. The strength of the code is that, unintentional stimulation of tissue is to be avoided because experimental studies show it can lead to nerve and muscle depolarization, which is, imagine just like your car alarm, opening a door or starting your car, it's an EMF trigger. So here's the sad part about it. And the code, the purpose of the code is to protect the public. And as soon as they said, the second part of the code is to reduce contact and induced currents. It should have set off alarm bells because inducing currents is electrical terminology for electrocution. I've had currents induced into me where, guess what, they burned holes in my body. And when they exited out my thumb, guess what? It looked like somebody drilled a perfect little hole in my thumb with a drill. Now, to take it further into the code, in the first 9 pages of Safety Code 6 was absolutely horrifically alarming, because it actually said this. Imagine this. We don't have any building codes, nor would banks, insurers, or anybody ever allow it, where a building code said, listen, buildings are toppling over. We don't know why. But when we figure it out, we'll change the code. There's no code like that. Safety Code 6 actually said, guess what? We're missing, and we don't understand the causal relationship or biological plausibility linking these frequencies to adverse health effects. So from there, we were referred to the radiation department from Health Canada, where I spoke with a radiation specialist, and we talked about the specific absorption rate test. Well, the specific absorption rate test, here's an example of this. One of the test models, they're called the Sam Phantom model. They're a plastic head with water in it. It's got a temperature probe in the top. Cell phone manufacturers, now this is the reality. Cell phone manufacturers have to submit their phones for the specific absorption rate test. And you'll actually see that when they do this test, they'll take the bracket, take the phone out and say, okay, we're half an inch away from the head as per manufacturer specs. And then they told me that when they turned on the phone and ran the phone, the highest power density was at the base of the antenna. So from there, they measured to the side of the skull where they said, this is heating a small localized area, even though they couldn't pick up that heat with their with their temperature probe in the head. Now, already it was alarming for me from all perspectives, because, and here's where I have to just give, even engineers their due at the time. When doctors came to me and said, Curtis, what does it mean that human bodies and their cells have voltages, capacitance, inductance, frequencies, and all the above? And I said, get the heck out of here. And they said, is that real? And I said, is that real? And they said, yes. And I said, that tells you the body's trying to maintain an incredibly intricate electrical system. So talking to Radiation Canada, and his name was Eric LeMay. And I just mentioned Eric because, I sent him into a bit of a panic, and he said he was going to call me back but never did. But when I said to Eric, I said, when you did that test with the cell phones, I said, how many antennas were communicating with that phone when you did the specific absorption rate test? The specific absorption rate test is done in a sterile environment. There are no antennas. There are no routers. There is no smart grid. They only tested the end-use device on a wireless circuit. Now, here's where it gets just horrible and extremely ugly, and quite frankly, it just makes me so angry with this. So when I talked about the manufacturer specs of the cell phone, where they have to hold it away from their head a little bit, I said, what did you guys do with Wi-Fi? They said, well, kids aren't laying on the floor with their heads next to the laptops. So they've got distance that a cell phone doesn't have, so they're good for exposure. When it came to smart meters, imagine this. They actually use an analogy that people are not standing out in their yards with their heads next to the smart meter like a cell phone. So therefore, they've got some distance because they're inside their buildings and they're safe. But they left out the antennas. They left out the routers. They left out the smart grid, where here's Fortis admitting, yes, we're going to blanket 17,000 square kilometers or 6,564 square miles. Imagine with a router, and again, I didn't know this until I heard a quote from somebody. I said, what's the range of that router? And he said 800 feet, which is, close to 3 football fields. So you think of bathing a classroom with all those children in it because they think it's cheaper to just, if they would have come to me and said, listen, we want you to give us a quote on wiring computer stations, well, we would have wired, 30 or 40 or 50 or 100 computer stations, whatever they wanted. You need plug-ins, you need cables, you need all the above. And then the other guy comes in with a router and says, I'll do it for 100th of the cost, because I'm just going to put a router up in the ceiling and we're going to radiate the whole entire room. Unfortunately, the problem with that is there's reasons why we use insulated wires and we have known conductors, because when wires are together in a cable, the EMFs actually cancel each other out. So dirty electricity is when something's plugged in. With the EMF issue, it's just horrible because it's uninsulated, and everything hit by the EMFs is inside the wire. You are part of the conductor. So here they are, here we are inducing children in classrooms where they said, you know, Curtis, it's not causing adverse health effects. Well, here's this thing called Ohm's Law. Now, Dr. Joan Moffat, when the city of Penticton had a moderated forum, Dr. Joan Moffat actually said to them, and I didn't even understand it at the time, she said, increasing cellular voltage by 0.2 microvolts, that means 0.2 millionths of a volt, changes white blood cells.
For the worst.
Well, and you imagine this, 0.2 microvolts is nothing. We wouldn't even consider something like that. And then when these electromagnetic fields with radio frequencies are expanding and collapsing, you're getting inrush currents that are higher than that, where 0.4 microvolt increase changes mood. Now, the worst part with that is that, you know, after the Sandy Hook shooting where that autistic boy, you know, shot those kids in the face with assault rifles and did what he did, you know, I contacted a respected professor and I said, could EMF interaction and interfering with his nerves make him do that? Autistic boys don't shoot kids in the face with an assault rifle. And for him to say, Curtis, he said, yes, you can neurologically, so that's what we call incoherency. He said, and what you talk about is, you know, interfering with the nerves, the depolarization, polarization in nerves. And more importantly, he said, you don't just compromise your nervous system, your nervous, hormonal, and immune systems are all compromised at the same time. And that was actually verified in the Fortis BC application with their experts who are from the United States called the Exponent Group. You know, Dr. Bailey admitted that the purpose of what they were doing in Safety Code 6 is to not trigger nerves. But he also said that, yes, the nervous, hormonal, immune systems work together. Mr. Bailey also confirmed under cross-examination in order for people to be hit by the EMFs or hurt, they had to be hit. Well, you know, when you leave out the grid and this blanket radiation, this is how people are being hit from head to toe. And again, the horrible part is it really just changes the scope of medical diagnosis with these nerve triggers going on. Now, here's the important part for this when we talk about September 14th, 2010. As soon as they told us that, you know, we confirmed that, oh, no, you left out the grid, and even asking Eric LeMay, what did you do with the bioelectrical information associated with humans? And for him to say, they're not electrical. That's a radiation guy who's, you know, he's obviously a brilliant guy, but he shouldn't be talking over his area of expertise because here's an example. Your brain is, 8.3 hertz, 8.3 cycles a second. When you're sleeping, it's half a cycle per second. And you have to be very careful because you have those specific voltages where, you know, even Dr. Lynch and Anthony Beauvais would talk about voltage deficiencies producing inflammation. Now, here's the worst part. As soon as we found out that, then you simply did this. Causation and biological plausibility was missing from exposure codes. Health Canada Safety Code 6, who uses the same science standards as the whole entire world, says we will amend the code as soon as we get peer-reviewed science. We don't want to hear, you know, citizens talk about something and it's not relevant. They were actually kind of dismissive of people complaining about this. But here's the reality. Causality means how are they hit? Well, as soon as you incorporate the routers, the antennas in the smart grid, here's how people are hit by the EMF, so you have causality. As soon as you incorporate the bioelectrical information associated with humans, now you've got biological plausibility, and the fact that the Sam Phantom model is an example of the plastic head. You know, it is ridiculous to use something like that. You know, when people say, Curtis, this doesn't cause tachycardia, I said, it doesn't have a heart.
Right.
It doesn't have a brain. It doesn't have eyeballs. It doesn't have tinnitus. It doesn't have any of these issues. And, you know, even when I was being interviewed by Dr. Hildegard, she shocked me even more by saying, Curtis, we've got this microbiology inside our guts and inside our system that are so small, but they're so critically important to every function of our body. Well, guess what? You're going to electromagnetically induce them. You're going to change their cellular voltages, whatever that might be, and you're going to effectively electrocute them as well. So here is that important part. Causality and biological plausibility was found. September 14th, 2010, it was reported to Health Canada is the authority having jurisdiction. Now, October 28th, now again, as things ramped up, Canadian Parliament Standing Committee on Health, and this was, at this time, this was, thank goodness for Citizens for Safe Technology because they helped get this going, but the Canadian Parliament Standing Committee on Health contacted our group, and they said, we want you to testify for Parliament, and specific to radio frequency issues. And I said, can you make me testify? And they said, do we need to? And I said, no. October 28th, by expert witnesses, and as a Canadian expert, Causality and Biological Plausibility was lectured in, was represented in front of a Canadian Parliament Standing Committee on Health. Now, December 2010, the report of the Standing Committee came out, and they said, for Health Canada, again, Martin Blank was in there. Now, Martin Blank, a wonderful science professionals, but again, EMFs are an electrical interaction first. So yes. They talked about Goldsworthy, they talked about his important work, and they talked about all of us reporting this to Canadian Parliament. But they also said that the NDP supplementary report on page 32 said asked Health Canada to thoroughly investigate specific to my credentials, because here's that electrical aspect, but there's not a margin of error. Now, unbeknownst to people that, at the time that we dug into this, one of the reasons we had to do this is, and again, here's me, and people laugh because, listen, I'm a real technical dummy sometimes, because it was actually the medical education that said, Curtis, you've got to change your credentials. And I said, I got enough going on. And I said, what's going on now? And she said, you're adjunct faculty for accredited medical education. I said, let me look that up. And I looked it up, and I said, I'm a professor type dude. And she said, without the pay. So here is this. I am an adjunct professor for continuing medical education programs, and we've been doing that actually now for 7 and 8 years, lecturing in these amazing programs where it took a lot of years to qualify that, to take that into medicine, giving them sight of their objectives. Now, the importance of that is this. And again, here's Tom Sidden out of Regional District of Okanagan-Similkameen. He said, Curtis, which university do you lecture at? Continuing medical education credits are required for ongoing medical licensing by every medical professional. And an example of this as well is because of law changes, lawyers need ongoing education credits or they're suspended from practicing law. So imagine this for us, that we are lecturing in the evolution of medical education. And again, I say this very carefully because we have to substantiate science. Our presentations are put in front of medical boards. It has to be substantiated, and it's an insured process. So we go from September 14th, and you can imagine the power of our whole incredible, wonderful, wonderful team and associates in the Integrative Health Forum, being 14,000 licensed health professionals, putting on these accredited programs for applicable to millions. January, I believe, 7th and 8th of 2011, Causation and Biological Plausibility was lectured at the University of Central Florida for education credits required for ongoing medical licensing. The program was applicable to every state, every province, every city, every minister, every health professional, and even across Canada. And even it's so interesting in Sharon Weinstein's letter to see that because the program was lectured in Florida at the University of Central Florida, Florida continuing education brokers wanted that education program approved for all health disciplines in the state. Doctors, dentists, nurses, and whatever, and things that I don't even understand. But that's the significance of this. Now, what that makes this is this. This means it's applicable everywhere to everybody. Now, unfortunately, what should have happened with this is Canada should have amended the code. Canada should have passed on that information. I say this too because it's shameful that Canada has to own this. Our leadership, and then Mr. Harper should have passed that on. They should have taken this to the United States. They should have taken this to the United Nations, because May 31st of 2011, the World Health Organization reported cell phones as possibly carcinogenic. Well, they even put quotation marks lawyers would put quotation marks, possibly, because you'd take it to court. And imagine going in front of a judge and saying, Your Honor, these technologies are possibly carcinogenic. Well, I would even say this, well, they're possibly not. You've got that loose language with this, whereas if Mr. Harper would have reported in his capacity to the World Health Organization and the United Nations, cell phones would have been called carcinogenic without exception. We're not supposed to, when even when you're using a cell phone, and I know people are in love with their technologies, you're hauling around an invisible wire, and you're part of the conductor. Your children are part of the conductor. If you're pregnant, your fetus is part of the conductor. And for men and women and otherwise, listen, your testicles are part of the conductor. So are your breasts, and so are the rest of you. So Mr. Harper and these guys did not do their job. Now here's where it gets dirty from there. And again, it's not my job to tell these guys, listen, our job is to report within our capacity, and people just have to be responsible for what they've done, including me, because even my own group said, you're kind of swearing a little bit. And I said, yes. I said, double and triple darn, and that's not the language I used. And they said, what's up with this? And I said, I have to talk about this. Right. We have to talk about this, or we would be guilty of reckless endangerment. We would have a criminal liability. We would have a civil liability. We have to tell the truth related to this. That's our job. So, as you know, in 2011, well, guess what? We contacted Rich Coleman in B.C., where BC Hydro was installing smart meters. No response. We contacted MLA Norm Letnick, and guess what? No response. The City of Kelowna, no response. Prime Minister Harper, no response. The Environment Minister, no response. The Health Minister, no response. Even the responses that I've gotten from the Health Minister are ridiculous and generic and thanking me for my interest in the environment. Instead of what these guys did is start mass deploying these EMFs because they said, hey, take a look at this. This is easy. We've been missing this. This wireless communications is a godsend because it's an innovative technology where, look at these economies and it's growing. Instead of wireless communications is a nice word like calling pharmaceuticals medicine. Wireless communications requires electromagnetic radiation, which is electromagnetic induction, which means you're going to kill anything that these EMFs interact with. So as Mr. Harper and his negligence, and I got to call him on that, negligent, and he's going to be responsible. He's going to be responsible and needs to be held accountable because they used a human exposure code. Here's an example in the Fortis application. When I cross-examined Dr. Bailey, I said, have you guys considered, pollinators and what this is going to do to bees and bugs and birds and all the above? And Bailey said, they adapt. And I said, is that in your risk assessment report? He said, no, I just have an interest in it. So imagine Fortis BC's experts. He's got an interest in it. So you've got an exposure code based on a 200-pound man for 6 minutes. How much does a bee weigh? And again, here's that important part where even today they're talking this in the media, where they talk about, okay, listen, here's that test. Here's what a cell phone does to your brain in 15 minutes. And then they'll use an analogy and say, well, listen, a smart meter is not like a cell phone, thank goodness. Well, of course they are. They're the same frequencies, all of the above. But imagine this, 15 minutes in a cell phone causing all these problems for your brain. Now, Health Canada actually, after causation was reported, changed their documentation to determine that Wi-Fi and that children, moms, pregnant moms, and everybody was okay for 24/7 exposure.
All based on a false assumption.
All based on a false assumption, all based on, hey, the plastic head says we can do this, and you've got some distance from this, instead of, here's that reality that you're hitting people from head to toe on this. Now, here's an example. Mark Warren, and you'll hear this language too. Curtis, we're only transmitting information for smart meters a few minutes a day. I said, is your grid on 24/7? Because you're going to want your meters on 24/7 because you've got to be able to read them, or if there's outages, or if there's problems or tampering. So he said, yes, the grid's on 24/7. that means you're getting a 24/7 cell phone call. That means your children are getting a 24/7 cell phone call from their smart meter. That means a fetus is getting a 24/7 cell phone call. And again, I'd throw this out there to anybody medically, and again, these absolute idiots that want to contradict this, is that how much radiation can a fetus take?
Zero.
What happens with a developing fetus with voltage changes, hormonal, immune, and nervous problems while the fetus is developing? And hence, here's that basic study on with chicken eggs, where they radiated chicken eggs with 900 megahertz, the same as a smart meter frequency. They radiated them for 4 hours. In a controlled study, eggs hatch in 21 days. The chicks were mutated.
And think of what's going to happen to all future generations of humans.
Well, and here's
the irradiation of little girls and
well,
ladies.
here. Imagine this truly to get calls from people that Curtis, my colleague, lost their baby, and we used Wi-Fi in schools.
Yeah.
So here's that part again. You worked in a school with Wi-Fi. The baby had a heart defect and died after a few months. Well, you're going to have these things going on, and again, Ole Johansson, Barry Trower, and all of these guys are reporting this. But it's just basically been ignored because, based on that plastic head. And again, industry should never have been allowed to move forward on this issue after the fact. But that's what happens when you're so entrenched that amending the code is going to affect your bottom line.
And collusion was reported more than 50 years ago.
Well, collusion, you're right. And here's the part, too, where they actually, reading declassified military documents. Even the military says, we don't understand the mechanisms because it's an electrical mechanism that needs to be explained by electrical professionals because it's an exceptionally dirty wireless circuit. You imagine it.
Oh, we just lost Curtis's line. This happens frequently. So we'll open the lines and we'll have a talk until he comes back in. Ellie, you're unmuted. Grace, you're unmuted. Lynn, you're unmuted. Sandy, you're unmuted. Susan, you're unmuted. Deanna, you're unmuted. And I can see if anybody raises your hand. Okay, so
actually, Diane, I do have a question.
Yes.
It would be for Curtis.
This is Grace talking, right?
Yes, it's Grace. It's Grace. Yeah, it's Grace talking, and we're talking about the wireless circuit.
Yes.
I'm talking about measurements of the wireless circuit because, as a sensitive person, I have an acoustimeter, and it goes off the chart when I'm near a smart meter. There are plenty of them in my neighborhood. And in my apartment, there's Wi-Fi. I get a reading on it. However, when I'm upstate New York in areas where you can get a cell phone signal, I get a 0 reading on the acoustimeter. So the acoustimeter looks wonderful, but I'm getting the cell phone signal. So I'm wondering what doesn't something like this pick up, and where can you find something that would measure the EMFs that the acoustimeter isn't picking up? I'm trying to move to a better area. The upstate area does better than my area, but there was one area we...
Oh, you're back, Curtis?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I had a technical problem, but if you've got somebody talking to you in a question, go ahead.
Yeah. We have everyone unmuted at the moment, so we'll just have a small mini all voices session here, and then you can carry on. Go ahead, Grace.
So that was the question about measurements, and I was told by some that the exposure drops off exponentially the further you are away from the smart meter, yet it broadcasts for a couple of miles, yet the cell phone towers, which are like no more than a mile or so away from where I was trying to use the acoustimeter, didn't seem to register on the acoustimeter. It didn't pick up. It looks wonderful, but in actuality, I could turn the cell phone on and I will get a signal. So what exactly doesn't the meter pick up, and why? Like, what can I do to actually measure the radiation that I'm being exposed to that the cell phone is picking up if the meters don't pick it up? And
Well,
again,
you know,
like,
something we talk about with this is that, you know, everybody knows this, that this code is based on power density. When they talk about power density, here's the horrible part about power density. You know, density is what it is, the density of the power. Power is watts, volts times amps. So when here's something that Dr. Havas did that was a part of an environmental petition that was very important, because, you know, when people talk about power density, the higher the power density, it means you're under more electrical load. So even when utilities say, oh, listen, you know, the power density drops off with distance or doing those things, well, it's because your load is dropping off with distance. The frequencies are still there, the induction is still there, and any power density is too much. And here's an example of this for everybody. Now, Dr. Havas did this for an environmental petition. It was really unfortunate that Health Canada did this. So Health Canada says, okay, what's accepted is 1,000 microwatts per centimeter squared. And I don't even know why they do per centimeter squared, because they think it's a localized area. You're being hit from head to toe. It's impacting you from head to toe. So they said it's 1,000 microwatts. Dr. Havas, and this was part of medical education's part of this, is Dr. Havas reported a DEC phone study where at 0.1 of 1 microwatt, there was altered brainwave activity. Now, as soon as you start to take it up a little bit, 120 microwatts, there was blood-brain barrier issues. I think 30 microwatts, there was, you know, leukemia. And medical professional says, what does that mean to you? And I said, the higher the power density, I said, the more intense the electrocution. The higher the load you're under, you're getting more wattage. You're getting more. But you can imagine this. Here's Dr. Havas, and here's that DEC phone study, picking up altered brainwave activity at 0.1 of 1 microwatt. That in itself, there is no acceptable radio frequency interaction. And they never, and here's what's important with this too. You know, Safety Code 6 is about exposure. And here's what's important for antennas and towers, because the Canadian, the Canadian Telecommunications Act, or whatever they're part of, it, is this. Existing and new cell phone towers have to comply with Safety Code 6. Now, never mind Safety Code 6 being a polluted document, that's about protecting the public, which means if you're being hurt and you're being hit, new antennas shouldn't happen. Existing antennas should be taken down. But these guys have just raged with this technology for what they call ease of communication instead of, you know, you've just undermined everything. Grace, and Grace, without getting specific, you know, you and I have just had very basic talks about even yourself, and here are these health challenges associated with you. And it just breaks my heart to even hear you right now talk about you're being electromagnetically induced, you're being neurologically interfered with, your hormonal and immune systems are being interfered with while you're fighting effectively for your life. You know, and you're trying to get better. And that's why the importance of this call is this. Listen, the laws changed whether they like it or not. So even what they call the CTIA, when I looked up this group, boy, they've got a lot of pretty impressive professionals in there. And this is supposed to be a non-profit group. These guys need to understand this. You can't radiate people and electrocute them and make a living at it. And what people need to do, and even explaining this to their police officers, is this. And police and officers, and people need to pass this on, because first responders have to take this very seriously, because they're being radiated. Their children are being radiated, their families, their buildings. Imagine how horrific this is for me, and we've consulted in military applications where our men and women are overseas, you know, serving under, you know, somehow to protect democracy. And while they're doing that, we're radiating their families back here with what's effectively a military weapon. Mm-hmm. You can't do this. Now, when people are talking to police, now here's a horrible thing that's gone on in B.C. when I talked to the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office actually said this to me. They said, "You're not affiliated with the Freeman group or the Freemen." And I said, "What the heck is that?" And she said, "This is this radical group that says we don't have to pay taxes, we don't have to do anything. We can do what we want." And I said, "No." And she said, "These hundreds of people complaining, all these people complaining, they're associating them with a bunch of whack jobs instead of this. These are constituents, professionals across the board going to the Attorney General who can't understand this police action, but here's the best way to say that. If you went to your police department and said, and even use this analogy, and share this with them because it's so critically important. I use this, that, Grandma next door to me is just an incredible human being, but I use this as an analogy saying, sometimes I don't like the way those seniors picnic and barbecue. They drive me crazy, so I'm going to tase them across the fence line. I'm going to shoot a taser into them and blast them again. And then when the police show up, I'll blast you and do those things. And the police would immediately say to you, if you did that, we would respond with lethal force if we had to. But you can't fire a taser across a property line. These are EMFs. You could call it a subtle tase, but the real terminology would be electrocution, subtle electrocution. And here's an example of this. Even me electrically. I can't dislike the neighbors and take a bare wire and throw it across the lawn and say, "Hey, come on, grab a hold of it, come and grab a hold of it." What would happen? I'm going to go to jail. You're going to be liable across the board. So with even Grace in your own area, something you guys get to do with this is you get to share this because there's not a margin of error. We work for industries. We work for governments. We work for everybody. I'm not the only electrical professional in the world. They didn't tell electricians what they were doing either. They didn't tell. And imagine this with this, and here's the horrible part of this for people to consider. It was during the Fortis BC application we found out this. Governments allowed these BC Hydro, as an example, to bypass all regulatory process to get that smart grid in a hurry, install those meters, because here's that climate change issue that we've just got to deal with. And so bypassing all regulation, this is how these guys have moved forward with the human exposure code to radiate you in your building. But they're radiating your building, your infrastructure. And cities need to take this very seriously because these are penetrating infrastructure. They will chip away and they will cause accelerated corrosion of infrastructure, bridges, power plants, museums. It doesn't matter what the heck it is unless you're an MRI chamber, which is designed to actually stop that electromagnetic interference. They've used this to bypass academia. And here's something that's really important for those watching as well, or those listening as well, is this. They bypassed academia. So they didn't go to universities and say, listen, by the way, we're going to use this 900 megahertz where Fortis experts said it would penetrate the ground 39 inches. We're going to radiate any microsystems in that ground. We're going to cause, instability in sinkholes. We're going to induce charges that are going to set off explosions where we wire places to be explosion-proof for all reasons in the world. Imagine even Fortis BC and these guys, they're so, I use this weaken the professional gene pool thing because that's what they've done as far as I'm concerned. Fortis BC and BC Hydro, the electrical divisions, they both have gas divisions. None of them passed it by their gas divisions. By the way, while you guys are working on gas leaks and that gas is moving, just the movement of the gas can set off an explosion. What Fortis and BC Hydro and the rest of these utilities are doing is you're blasting these EMFs out there where you're going to induce charges where they can wait for those charges to blow up, whether it be in a lab, whether it be in, West Texas, the fertilizer plant blowing up. I heard about a great big explosion in California where they said, could this be related to a gas leak? And guess what? If you had a gas leak and you had these EMFs in California, bathing these areas, of course you can have an explosion.
Mm-hmm.
So here's something to take forward, Grace, even in your areas with this, is that your municipalities are not going to be happy at the idea that they've had a building code effectively undermined with a human exposure code when it's not applicable. Because here's what goes on. When a building's no longer compliant with code, it means you're not going to get insured, you're not going to get occupancy, you're not going to get funding. So the banks are going to end up with these paperweights in these buildings that are good for nothing, and you're not going to have that tax base to go with it. Imagine for municipalities where, they're expecting governments to tell them the truth on the safety of this technology. And again, with respect to what they're doing, and I'm going to use Seattle and Washington State as an example. These guys are so, corrupt. When I say corrupt, people shouldn't take offense at that, because if you've got a corrupt data disk, that just is what it is. If you're part of that process, then it is what it is. But here's an example that the city of Seattle has been told, listen, your smart meter program isn't going to address 1 watt of your energy issues, and you're going to hurt people, you're going to cause compromise of those buildings. Well, these weenies, because, one, they're talking over their areas of expertise, are doing those things, they're so intimidated by this information instead of using the right science professionals that they've just ignored them. Here is a watershed commissioner out of Washington State who asked us in another program to give them a document related to Wi-Fi in schools and what it means to 1 million students. Well, imagine 1 million students and Wi-Fi. Well, one, you're going to electromagnetically induce 1 million students. You're going to affect them neurologically, hormonally, immune-wise. You're going to just interfere with them unlike anything. You're going to cause rapid acceleration of corrosion, infrastructure, buildings, all the above. And here's another thing, too. And again, when I talk about the work we do has saved industry and governments and everybody else hundreds of billions of dollars, that's just a reality, because when you work at this level, and it's not just me, there's millions of us, that you work at these levels and you work in these dangerous environments, you want to catch these problems before they happen, before you get into the failure and the liability issues with this. But, I've had lawyers say to me, they're neurologically stimulating those children and altering them when they're in school. Is the school going to have a liability? Of course you are. Mm-hmm. You've hurt them in school. You've hurt teachers. The unions aren't addressing this or even considering it. And here's something with IEEE, which is electrical engineers and electronics engineers. Now, these guys here, quite frankly, are just irritate the heck out of me, and I hope a lot of you are listening with this, because here's why. Electrical engineers have errors and omissions insurance. Engineers will have errors and omissions insurance. We'll do work where I've had errors and omissions insurance, because the last thing you want to do is create a problem, especially when you've got this insurance that says, and even listen, a lot of years ago, 30 years ago, we'd have insurance that, listen, it was, $10 million per occurrence. That's what explosions are worth, and now it's a lot more. But here, IEEE, how these guys got technically overwhelmed by a plastic head is something that they're going to have to answer to, but they're also going to have to be accountable for what they've done by advancing technology. And, hey, let's put it in cars. Let's have driverless cars. Mm-hmm. Let's just put this stuff everywhere for ease of communication instead of there's nothing compatible with these EMFs on the planet except portable devices. This will end life on the planet. This will just do unrealized damage across the board. And here's the thing after that. When Google doesn't have any more customers, then how much money are you making? Because, listen, their own people are going to be adversely affected by this as well. There is no bright side to this. And imagine this analogy, and Diane, you've heard a little bit about this week.
Yes.
I don't know enough about the Nuremberg Treaty. But listen, you don't do experiments on people under any circumstances. You don't do experiments on people, and under no circumstances do you subtly electrocute them. And here's the other part of this. Binary code in computer language is O's and ones, O's and ones, O's and ones. It doesn't matter whether it's pornography. It doesn't matter whether it's the Bible. O's and ones and O's and ones and O's and ones. So you think of these O's and ones and these movies and this electrical information blasting through people and further electrically interfering with them. And here's those real results that we don't talk about with that. So, these guys are in a lot of trouble. You can't do that. And here's a bad thing, too. We all know this. during the World War II. And listen, and I want to say this with due respect, because here's why for me. In my crazy career and doing things, listen, I've broken bones and severed arteries, and one time I severed a major artery, and I would have bled out. But a former German Second World War prisoner saved my life. So when I say this with due respect, because I'm talking about these Nazis. I'm talking about, any of these creepy people that decided to put people in ovens and do those atrocities that happened back then and affect millions of people. It's just disgusting. And, I'd love to see Auschwitz someday just for the humility and for the tears and for what was done. But here's the reality. Prime Minister Harper has allowed Canadian, this is Canada, Prime Minister Harper has allowed Canadian populations to be put inside man-made microwave ovens. Those classrooms with your children in them, those are man-made microwave ovens. Where here's Dr. John Orr of West Polytech. Now, he heads the electrical engineering department. And in a radio show, Dr. Orr says this. They said, are microwaves dangerous? Yes. If you're inside the oven or they're leaking, they're dangerous. Well, guess what? Washington State wants to put Wi-Fi in all their classrooms, which means you're going to put 1 million students inside a man-made microwave oven. Mr. Harper wants the same thing and here's where it gets dirty too. While they weren't amending the exposure code, they were actually revising it because there were so many complaints. So they're revising Safety Code 6 in Canada, which would have changed the code again around the world. So to watch this process unfold, that while the Health Canada is revising Safety Code 6, so here's the federal government, here's Mr. Harper's administration, like it or not, they're going to revise Safety Code 6. So what they do is they retain the Royal Society of Canada, which is unfortunately called Canada's intellectually elite. And what's horrible about that is you just had a bunch of PhDs talking over their head and not even understanding what they were talking about electrically. Because here's the bottom line. The plastic had overwhelmed them, where at the end of the day, they came back and said, no, there's nothing that needs to be changed with Safety Code 6. But at the same time, they're revising. Imagine this. You're revising a code. You're revising standards. At the same time that is being done, Ontario announces $150 million for Wi-Fi in kindergartens. Ottawa announces Wi-Fi in public parks because everybody can hook up. And you can hook up, and then when you're hooking up, we're going to be billing you. We're going to get taxes and all the above. At the same time that they're revising safety codes, Safety Code 6, the exposure code, Industry Canada, under Harper's administration, is auctioning off the 700 megahertz frequency range. And you know why they even say that? It penetrates deeper into buildings. So therefore, when you're just deep inside a building, you can still hook up and they can still bill you for minutes and they can still do this and it's all good, thinking this is all good. At the same time that they're revising Safety Code 6, Fortis BC is applying for wireless smart meters. And Fortis BC's application should have failed without exception. These guys did not qualify the safety of their of the wireless technology at all. The BC Utilities Commission will have to answer for their corruption or whatever they did too, because they rubber stamped Fortis BC because they would have had to reverse BC Hydro's smart meter program. And again, you imagine this, and people have heard about this. Oh, the intense forest fires. Well, imagine this. The radio frequencies, if anybody ever saw this, and I don't know where they did this, but they actually show like a wheatgrass or whatever it is where these students use the Wi-Fi router on these plants, and they radiated one dish and didn't radiate the other dish. Well, here's this growing, thriving plant in the Wi-Fi radiated group. They're dead. So imagine this. You're going to bathe these areas. You're going to kill forests. You're going to make them drier. You're going to have more intense forest fires. While you're also, imagine this, California is reporting $2 billion in losses already, but their wireless programs are contributing to their own droughts while they adversely affect their infrastructure and everything else. And again, shame on them for this, because as much as I saw it, is it the California Council of Science and Technology? They did a beautiful document on smart meters and what was going to be done, because it shows everything Unfortunately, it technically overwhelmed them where nobody drew that association to the specific absorption rate. And here was this information that was left out of this. And guess what? Canada didn't report it.
Right.
So for grace for you and everybody else, and here's what you get to do, because, here's an example where somebody just even today said, Curtis, the Attorney General of Illinois, just isn't listening. Well, that needs to be explained by an electrical professional. And the reason I say that we would participate in, and here's why. I never anticipated having to put 10,000 hours into this horrific crime against humanity and for everything that it is, just to understand this complexity of all things. Even in the very beginning, we're trying to dig into this, and they said, what does it look like? I said, it appears they've put birds, bugs, bees, buildings, rocks, trees, fish, moose, deer, dogs, cats, vehicles, and everything inside this very dirty electrical circuit. And that's precisely what they've done. And again, for ease of communication, when the bottom line is this, there is nothing on the planet compatible with those EMFs. And it doesn't matter who you are. You can be Russia, the Ukraine, you can be Iraq, you can be Iran, you can be North Korea, you can do all of the above. You're not going to spend your way out of this nonsense. We all share this atmosphere. We all share this global economy. And imagine this, for me even to have to represent this now with what Mr. Harper and these guys have done. This is going to be going through the powers that be, including insurers and the Auditor Generals, because the Auditor General Act of Canada and the Auditor General audits the federal government. And, the Auditor General Act under sustainability, Diane, you've got that where people can read it. It's just very simple. We don't impact future generations with what we do today. It's to protect the public. It's to protect health. It's to protect ecosystems. Because when we lose our pollinators, we're done. There's going to be no economy. And when there's no economy, who's going to get paid?
Nobody.
Who's going to get paid? And guess what? These guys are going to have to go back to this. Now, here's something I say, and I say this with respect because I like Barack Obama. Now, one of the reasons why I like him is this. I think if he got out of line, Michelle would just, quite frankly, beat the crap out of him. And, they could be in their bedroom and doing those types of things, and there's no Secret Service in there, and she would take Barack and just, twist him by the arm, and that would be the end of that. And he's a good family man. He means well, but what a horrific thing to even hear the president talk about these smart meters, but they're only the end-use device. Imagine, his legacy is going to include effectively, building man-made microwave ovens and putting people, children, and everybody else into them. You can't do this. And again, that peer-reviewed science supporting this is called electricity. It's not rocket science. It's not. We're not lobbyists of any particular kind. And here's what you guys get to do with this, grace and otherwise. You get to report this to your authorities having jurisdiction, because people don't understand this as well. And I've said this. I said, do you think lawyers are going to shut down? Do you think lawyers are going to say, listen, we're going to shut down, insurers are going to shut down, it's all good, we're just going to take these trillion-dollar losses and you guys carry on? It's not going to happen. They're going to sue them to extinction, and they're going to take everything that they have, and there's nobody that's got the assets to cover this damage.
Right.
Well, at this point, no one is listening. They have already put Wi-Fi in all of the schools on Long Island, maybe not all, maybe it's a little bit of an exaggeration. And if somebody gets sick, they go into the denial mode and claim it cannot be the Wi-Fi. So I've already written to one legislator, and he didn't even reply to my letter.
Well, here's why you got to do that. Here's why you do that. And Grace, and listen, I don't offer excuse for them, because here's the bottom line. One, you're a constituent. You should never be ignored under any circumstances. There's no excuse for it. But these guys have been told that all of you are complaining that it's safe with a short distance because of this. Now, here's what's important with this. You're going to share some of this information that we're going to be producing and sharing this, including the Auditor General, when these guys jump into this. Like I said, it's going to be global for all reasons in the world, because you can't do this. You will be able to share this with these guys and this legislator, and you can even share some of the things that I'm posting now, because we're the science behind policy. It is what it is, and unfortunately, they're just dismissing you and technically ignoring you, when the bottom line is you have every right, and everybody, quite frankly, should just be incensed. Now, and here's a reality. These people should be arrested. that legislator should be arrested. As soon as you're in the know that this is causing harm and you don't do your job, look up criminal negligence.
Yeah, but
criminal negligence, and you, me, or anybody else. And I say this to people all the time. If I hurt apprentices or people got killed on my watch and I was negligent or reckless, I'm going to be liable civilly as well as criminally, and they will too. So I want you to share this information. Here's the important part. And Diane, you can attest to this because we don't talk over our area of expertise. The laws are there. Medical education is there. Grace, they haven't even told your medical professionals that this is lectured in medical education now, and it's accepted and approved medical education to every health professional in the United States as well. And they didn't share that with them. So you get to share this information. Here's an important part. We would represent that information for you because even in the Fortis BC application, I was a registered intervener, and I was there for two reasons. One, I wanted these guys to technically beat me up. I wanted these guys to technically substantiate the safety of these technologies and educate me on this so that we could then represent that for everything that it meant. And that didn't happen. These guys were disqualified, dismissed. That's the exponent group out of Maryland or whatever they are. The science has changed. Peer-reviewed science has been found. And unfortunately, these EMFs have been illegal as applied for 5 years. And Mr. Harper and shame on Canada for not doing their part. But that's what happens too is, and again, when I did my post-secondary education, listen, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, really and seriously. I was that 16-year-old boy once that told my parents, don't tell me what life's all about. I'm 16. And, at 16, you're just still brain dead. But when I did my post-secondary education, I was amazed to go to a college and go into a university and say, look at this. Here are all these different departments. We're all a complement to each other so we can get things done. Nobody informed us that there was a special interest group at the top of this pile called politics, political interests. And here's why this is horrible. I've owned companies and I've employed as many as 40 people. I did not employ a special interest group that was there to undermine me, nor would I. Nor would anybody else. You don't do that. And the idea that Prime Minister Harper, imagine this and how shameful this is for Canada. Prime Minister Harper didn't share this with the Liberals. I don't care who you're voting for. He didn't share this with the Liberals. He didn't share it with the NDP. He didn't share it with the Green. He didn't share it with anybody. So these guys are going forward with these election platforms without understanding the economy's changed. The populations are being radiated. And they don't even realistically understand that that's going on right now. And it's just shameful that this is while we're electing people. And again, imagine this for me where they talk about democracy, democracy, democracy. Well, here's the reality for me, that when politicians get elected, I've looked forward to it because you get to deal with these guys because your codes and standards, well, in Canada, guess what? We're living under Mr. Harper's democratically elected dictatorship. As soon as these guys are in office, they do what the heck they want and just dismiss everybody in between because of their agendas. They're working with industry. They're colluding with industry when government should never be colluding with any industries. The economy is developed out here by the people doing our jobs, and we know how to do that. So I want you to keep that in mind that, listen, there are ways to address these issues where it can be fixed and create this massive real economy in the United States and Canada and here and deal with these important issues. But, Grace, I'm going to be sharing information with you, and you're going to take it to your legislatures. And here's the most important part. You can't have a policeman come to you and this policeman says, Grace, you can't jaywalk here. And you look at him and go, whatever, and go to walk across the road. It doesn't work like that. So when you take this information to your legislators, here's what they have to do. They have to technically disqualify me. They can't dismiss me. Your municipality has to technically disqualify me. They can't dismiss me. But guess what? Your civil engineers there with errors and omissions insurance haven't been told that, oh, by the way, here's what these EMFs are doing to buildings and causing this. Here's what it's doing to fire separations. Now imagine this even I want to put this in there too. Imagine with fire separations. Fire separations are like we'll double up drywall and make a fire separation so that it compartmentizes a fire in a building supposedly for 30 minutes, for an hour, or whatever, so people can get out and do those things. Now, people have seen drywall before. What would happen if you violently shook drywall or a fire separation billions of times per measurable second? And the higher the power density, the more intense those vibrations would be. You're going to affect fire separations. So therefore, we put our first responders in a risky situation where those fire separations protecting them and you isn't there. And they need that to be going there. So what you're going to do, Grace, is you're going to pass this forward, and whether they like it or not, they have to technically disqualify this. The FCC has to do the same thing. And if they don't do their jobs, what would happen if you don't do your job and people are being hurt? You're going to be liable. That's just the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Grace, I want to share that with you too, because it breaks my heart to see what people are going through. It breaks my heart to get the calls that we do. When imagine this, doctors have called, and here's a female doctor where her husband's taking her to court to take the children away from her because he thinks she's lost her mind about these EMFs interfering with her.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so disrespectful. Even when I was on the Texas PUC's expert panel related to smart meters, and to have doctors step up saying they were off work and being ignored related to this issue. Soldiers stepped up and talked about these issues, and they were being ignored. And quite frankly, and a horrible part is the Texas, we provided written evidence for the Texas Senate, and listen, unfortunately, they're going to have to be accountable for what they've done too, because they just still move forward with this technology, or allowed it to move forward, thinking it's innovative instead of it's electromagnetic radiation. It's vulnerable. It makes the grids vulnerable. It will kill everything. It's just despicable what's happened. It's just despicable what's happened.
Right.
And again, I don't know if I gave you guys these figures here. Can I say this? Now, here's the thing that I said, and I've quoted this before. Take 900 megahertz as an example. 900 megahertz is 900 million cycles per second. Mm-hmm. Those electromagnetic fields are oscillating or changing, interacting and changing polarity with anything they interact with 1.8 billion times per measurable second. Mm-hmm. That's happening 3,600 times per hour, 86,400 times per day. Now, this was reported, causation was reported 5 years ago. Now, as a result of Harper's negligence and what they did, any EMFs at that time that are interacting with people to date, they have, imagine this, expanded and collapsed inside bodies, buildings, and otherwise 157,680,000,000 times. Billions of times, 157,680,000,000 times.
Mm-hmm.
It's incalculable, and it's just disgraceful that this has happened, and this has happened because of political interests and self-interest and industry interests, and moving forward with an exposure code, missing causality in the fact they're using a plastic head. People need to understand this. The specific absorption rate itself is an admission of guilt that people are being hurt. You're absorbing this energy, except guess what? It's electromagnetic fields. Mm-hmm. And so, Grace, I'm going to be sharing more information with you, and I know I was going to talk more to you about that, but we're just getting this part of this stuff now, and again, you've got bigger powers that are looking for this information too. So I'm going to be sharing that with you very soon. I'll share information you can take to your group. And again, Grace, people, this is where I'm only going to get personal with this, because listen, as first responders, listen, you got a tough job. We got tough jobs. Even when StatsCan came to my place to see me and they said, "Do you speak a second language?" I said, "Yeah, foul," because you work in these rough, tough industries where, listen, I've worked in industries where, guess what? Things happen, people get killed, you don't. It's a rough, tough thing to do this. I will never share with anybody the tears I shed for all of you, the fact that we've done this to you.
Yeah, and you go at it day after day after
You
day,
go,
seven
you
days a
have
week.
to. And imagine if my mother, if my mother was alive, the idea that my mother is being assaulted with a frequency and biological weapon is applied, a baby. Imagine saying to doctors, if a fetus had vocal cords, do you think we'd hear them screaming?
Of course.
Well, and it's just horrific. So, Grace, I can't even apologize enough because of your health challenges, and here you are trying to do so much, where now your government and this industry is adversely affecting what you're trying to do for yourself. And again, I can't apologize enough to people that this never should have happened.
Yeah, it certainly is affecting my health outcomes and heavily on my heart, and I'm appalled when I think about what it's doing to everybody. I'm also appalled because of the denial of everybody. If I confront somebody, I confronted a pregnant pharmacist today in my pharmacy, and I have articles for you to read about what cell phone use can do to a developing fetus. And she looked at me and gave a look as if she had smelled a bad smell. I was so shocked that I couldn't even believe that she had this look on her face relating to what I said to her. So I persisted, and I said again, well, would you like the articles? And she just said, no. Thank you.
Well, Grace, now here's the only bad thing that you give people with this.
What? Yeah.
Here's the horrible part. We expect our governments to tell the truth, especially when you're talking about science. So the idea that here's this pregnant woman who might have gone to her doctor, who hasn't been informed differently, who has gone to a legislator and said, no, it's safe in doing those things, when guess what? Everything you're saying is 100% correct. Now, and again, I'd say this, that, people have said, Curtis, children, these guys are addicted to this wireless technology. And I said, when I was a young man, guess what? Pregnant mums were told to smoke Marlboros. Because, and camels and whatever there are, because, listen, it's just going to settle you down during that pregnancy or doing those types of things. Whether people better understand this too. As soon as insurance companies dig into this and find out that this is causing those problems, I can guarantee this, they're going to put disclaimers on there that are just going to say, listen, we're not going to pay out on any cell phone issues. We're not going to pay out on any wireless issues. If you use them, guess what? We're not going to pay out on it. And because there's no way in the world they're going to take this $1 trillion hit. So, again, Grace, you got to thank you so much for talking to that lady. But, she probably even went and talked to other people, and they said, no, this is safe. This is safe. It's okay. Well, golly,
my posts on the electrohypersensitivity group, but I recently saw my gynecologist at Mount Sinai Medical. Oh, yes, you must excuse me. I did have a brain injury, and I discussed with her Wi-Fi and cell phone use, because there were pregnant women sitting in that office with the cell phones up against their abdomen. In the small time that I was there were two of them, and I spoke to one and told her the same thing. Do you know that it can cause damage to your fetus? She looked at me as if I was crazy, and then I spoke to my doctor, who just had the surprised look on my face. She knows I do a lot of research, so she wasn't going to contradict me, but she didn't say anything. She just looked surprised. And I said, let me send you the data. And I sent her a whole bunch of articles and discs with information on it, which I'm assuming she's going to read. But what astounds me is up until this point, nobody at Mount Sinai Medical Center knew anything about this. They knew nothing
you're
about
right.
Yeah.
Here's something I want you to think about with this, and here's why that's important. And again, it's not because, the Integrative Health Forum is a lobby group of any particular kind as well. When you see, and here's for everybody across the board, they're not selling anything. It's medical education for education credits required for ongoing medical licensing. Now, as soon as your medical professionals see that, and guess what? It's a game changer for them. Because even with the thermography we do, well, you know what? When we do thermal radiation or infrared imaging at this level, people go, Curtis, we've heard of thermography. It was discredited here and discredited here. Well, it might be discredited there. As soon as you tell them it's lectured for continuing medical education credits, it's a game changer because they have to sit up and pay attention. because those CME credits are required for ongoing medical licensing. The Integrative Health Forum can get a hold of their professors who can qualify this, and you share that letter across the board with your health professionals, and if they need to talk to somebody about that. And again, here's what's important with this. This is an electrical mechanism. So when I've had PhDs say to me, Curtis, we disagree with what you say, and I said, you're a PhD. I said, you did a thesis, I said something based on theory, and then you had to represent that orally. I said, you're not electrically qualified in any opinion. When we dealt with the chief physicist, and actually Tony Muck was he was proudly an author of Safety Code 6. When we dealt with him, he said, Curtis, I'm the chief physicist. And I said, you're not electrically qualified in any opinion. You can't just randomly talk about electricity. It just doesn't work that way. And it's the same thing when professional engineers and any pompous professional that would speak over their area of expertise, even for a professional engineer to say, Curtis, I don't understand this, but I don't believe you. Well, guess what? You're not electrically qualified in any opinion. And it's the same thing. I wouldn't tell any other professional what to do. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter if they're a painter. It doesn't matter if you're picking up garbage. It doesn't matter what you do, daycare, anything. We do not overspeak our boundaries in any capacity. So we're going to give you information to share with them. And again, your medical professionals need to, and they will understand this. We've even said this. They've changed the scope of diagnosis. Does that put a liability on the physician? And the answer has to be yes. They've put a liability on those guys for all these reasons in the world where, listen, what do people think lawyers are going to do when they find out this? Here's an example of this. Frank Clegg is a former president of Microsoft in Canada. Now, Frank Clegg, with great respect for, computers and technology, I love technology. I like it wired for all reasons in the world. Frank's not electrically qualified in any opinion. So Frank has already said this publicly, that it would take millions of dollars to substantiate the burden of proof, proving these technologies do harm people. And the answer is 100% no. The burden of proof has been found and reported. It's there. Now, you imagine this, and has anybody ever dealt with lawyers? Well, let me tell you something with lawyers. Listen, I've got friends that are lawyers, and plus I deal with these guys, and guess what? When a lawyer says, listen, we get a contingency. So, Curtis, if you want to sign off on this contingency here, we're going to sue somebody for $1 million, and you're going to give us 25 to 35%. So they make $350,000. They like to make their money. And here's the way it goes. What do people think lawyers are going to do when they find out the peer-reviewed science creating harm is electricity that can be easily substantiated? Grace, you're going to have a lawsuit. You've got lawsuits. You've got real lawsuits where the damage is measurable by the second. You can't do this. And these lawyers are going to jump into this in a contingency for all reasons in the world, and they're going to just be incredibly wealthy. And if anybody thinks lawyers are going to avoid that, you haven't been around very many lawyers. And anybody thinks that insurers are going to pay out on this, it's not going to happen. They're going to sick their lawyers on this. And they're going to go after these guys for everything they've done. And again, I don't say that as any perceived threat of any particular kind. It is what it is. It's called liability. So, Grace, we're going to help you with that information and give you help. And the thing is, it's a sad thing that you should even have to be doing that while you're going through what you're going through on your own. But we're going to help you with that and give you that science and give it to your municipality. And you've got to tell them, listen, they better listen or they're going to be liable. The same way you or I would be if we recklessly endangered people and they got hurt. There's not an option for people. And the same thing even with Mr. Harper. Here's the Prime Minister of Canada. And are we patriotic? Of course we're patriotic. Everybody's patriotic. You should be patriotic to doing those types of things. And here's this disgusting representation of leadership where this has been allowed to happen under his watch. And again, that's just something he's going to have to answer to. But people have said, he's going to be exempt from criminal liability. No, he's not. No, he's not. NEC, you can be Bill Gates. Listen, if you run over a whole bunch of people and hurt people, if you do those types of things, do you think they're going to get away with it? The answer is no. There's nobody exempt from the law. And then that's again just a sad thing. So Grace, and I'm looking forward to just giving you some more information too, and we're just going to be helping you with this. And it's just again disgraceful. You have to go through that, and then quite frankly, be disrespected and ignored.
If there's anyone else who would like a question, there's a little symbol between the telephone receiver and the speaker symbol in the dashboard, and you just have to click on that and your hand gets raised virtually, and I can unmute you and you'll be on the line with Curtis. Anyone else with a question? No, no one?
No, and people think about this too seriously. Listen, there is no such thing as a dumb question. I don't care what people do or what you do. There is no such thing as a dumb question related to this. Even if you're thinking it is, it's just better to have questions answered. Or you can listen to this afterwards, and then you can just, email people, email Stay on the Truth. You can, you can contact us, and we can even refer you to somebody. But that documentation is out there in full support of you. And even that letter from Health Education Administrators, that should be shared across the board. So. Frank Clegg and these guys, the same thing. The burden of proof is there, Frank. I hope you're going to be listening to this. And here's the sad thing as well with this. If people have asked me what's frustrating about what's been created, when the government doesn't do their job, all of a sudden you've got these different factions and people. You've got some people talking about, hey, we're doing this. Hey, we're doing something different. Hey, we don't believe Curtis. I've actually had to spend a lot of time fighting people, including, listen, I've had a master's in social work say, listen, I don't believe what you say and what you do, and, well, there's not a lot of social workers there are where we are. But to be ignored like this and thinking it's some type of competition instead of this, no. We are electrically substantiating this. Where I said this, the bioinitiative report is 1,500 pages. I wasn't nice to them because I'm not a biological professional. And so I got an adjunct professor and a doctor that I respect, and I said, I want you to go through the report front to back. And he went through the report front to back, and at the end of it, he said, you're electrically substantiating them. You're electrically substantiating Ole Johansson. You're electrically substantiating Barry Trower. You're electrically substantiating Jerry Flynn. You're electrically substantiating Carpenter. And here's why this is important, too. Now, because I heard David Carpenter in media in New York. And David Carpenter, and really bless him for all his work that he's done in this. But David Carpenter says, hey, I think 5% of the population has got EHS, which is, electrohypersensitivity. Instead of, no, David, anybody in that coverage area, 100% of them are being subtly electrocuted to different degrees. And here's why when I say that, when they say some people feel this and some people don't. And the guy from Illinois, as a matter of fact, said this today. He said, Curtis, I guess we have to wait for healthy people to get sick before they do anything. Here's an example with electromagnetic fields. In our area right here, and this is Fortis BC's area, it's a company probably they bought or took over, and here's an example. Single power lines are dangerous, and because of their electromagnetic fields not canceling each other, you have to be very careful with single power lines. So here's a lineman working a reported 70 feet away from a live power line, but the live power line is parallel to the dead one. Well, what happened is somebody made a mistake, and they didn't ground this out properly. Whatever happened, poor thing. But guess what? The live power line electromagnetically induced the dead line. The error was made, and it killed the lineman immediately. But if he had been perpendicular, if that line had been perpendicular to that live line, nothing would have happened. So actually, Safety Code 6 talks about this. How you're affected by these frequencies is, listen, the speed of the frequencies, the power densities, orientations to the field, your size, hydration, you think about the chemicals, you think about toxicities in your body. There's just a whole lot of factors. So with that said, if there's any other questions, I'd sure look forward to answering them.
Oh, here we have Cheryl. Go ahead, Cheryl. You're live. Cheryl, go ahead. You're being recorded. You're on the line live with Curtis. Go ahead.
My name is Susan. I unmuted my phone, and I wanted to say something.
Okay.
A statement, actually, based on what Curtis said. Absolutely, these administrative officials can be sued because you have to go through an administrative process to take away their liability protections, and then you can sue them face-to-face, person-to-person, and get everything they own and, just everything, because they're not following what their mandate was for their oath of office and the mandate of what their job description was. And I'm going through a legal class that's going to be teaching me how to do that, and a lot of other people are, because everybody's just fed up. My two favorite people are Barry Trover and Curtis. They're the best people to, I don't miss anything that they say, and they're the most wonderful people and the most dedicated people on this issue. I have been harmed by EMFs, not microwaves. And so that's what gave me a wake-up call to get in there and do something about this. Anyways, that's all I have to say. I'm just saying that, yeah, you can get everything that they own, Just
Susan, good for you. And you know what I want to say with this, too, is, I was actually part of the Oregon court case where, they were taking the Wi-Fi into schools to court and doing those things. Now, unfortunately, it was so legally complex that, a lot of technical stuff. But even being part of that association with that case is, we're not there to, I could never, qualify what Barry Trower does and wouldn't want to. His experience is what it is. But you're absolutely right on this. And everybody imagine this for real. You've got the science supporting exactly what you said. So when this goes into court, you imagine this. The FCC and all these guys that say this is safe have to take a plastic head with water in it and substantiate that aquarium is science. And I want to see a judge's face when they say, are you kidding me? That's the aquarium you're using. Because, listen, that little plastic head, the specific absorption rate, wasn't on that spacecraft that landed on the asteroid. That thing seriously should be an aquarium, and it's just not even science. So when people need to understand this, taking us forward into that litigation part of this is this. Causation's been found and reported. The peer-reviewed science is called electricity. There's no margin of error. It's really going to be simple because you can't hurt people. You can't do this. And again, Fortis BC's experts, the exponent group, listen, these guys were just technically beat up, whether they like to admit it or not, where even the electrical engineer admitted those oscillations. And imagine this with the electrical engineer. So obtuse in speaking over his head, he actually says this in the cross-examination. Curtis, if you're saying that 900, that people aren't, humans aren't compatible with 900 megahertz, he said, you're right. But because nothing at your body works at that frequency, your body doesn't recognize it, which is electrically ridiculous. But again, this is what happens when these guys move forward with this plastic head. It's just disgraceful what's been happening. And I don't care if it's ICNERP and WhatNERP and other NERPs. These guys have to get their heads out of their butts, quite frankly, and do their jobs. And we have to get this weakened professional gene pool out of the way so scientists can do their jobs. We've got great science professionals out there. They're effectively being dismissed and ignored. And that's going to change for those things. So, Susan, I want to thank you for that, too. And again, here's the part for me. I'm really just doing my job and don't have a choice.
Well, can I say one thing more? What impresses me about what Barry Trover has done is he's collected 6,500 peer-reviewed studies over the past 60 years or more. Old ones and new ones, and I think the old ones are better because apparently the newer ones are just kind of false studies by industry. And even the good medical reviews, are saying things like that they can't trust the studies that are coming out. But anyways, Barry Trover has collected 6,500. And you mentioned a few really good studies, but one that impresses me is the one where they did, well, not the one, but the many studies that they've done on animals that shows by the third generation, those animals, whatever animals they were studying, they've done many veterinarian studies on this, cannot conceive, cannot reproduce at all by the third generation. Now, there's a word that starts with G that this might be a crime against, a crime against humanity about, and that word is genocide. That's what, that's what it makes me think of.
Well, you're right. You're right, and here I would say this with what you're talking about too. Now, these industries have determined that you're safe for 24/7 exposure. And here's an example. Now, I'm just looking for this now, but I was actually sent a study by doctors. And here's another issue where these guys actually, they radiated the eggs with the chicks in the eggs and measured the deformities before they hatched. Now, you think about a baby girl. A baby girl is born with all her eggs. And then you're going to put her into a kindergarten or a daycare, and then you're going to put her into school. And imagine this to represent scientifically. If she can ever reproduce, what is she going to reproduce? And I want to say this, too, that, Terrence Young is a member of Parliament in, I think it's Oakville, Ontario. Mm-hmm. Now, Terrence Young has come forward and said, listen, they want standards changed, they want this. Now, when I actually talked to his staff actually said to me, they said, Curtis, do you know that we used to work for Bell? And here's a wireless company. And I said, no, I didn't know that. She said, everybody on the testing floor had cancer.
Ooh.
All the children, I think, were born with, is it called a spina bifida?
So horrible.
And it's horrible because, you've got these people on these test floors and you're exposing them to these, but they admitted that themselves. Everybody had cancer, and here the babies had spina bifida. And again, burying these guys, and again, shame on all of us that, we didn't listen to people, because I've actually been showing cell phone radiation images in medical education for a lot of years, and people would say, do you use a cell phone? I said, no. I said, these guys left out the antennas. I really didn't think the exposure code was using a plastic head, and it wasn't until they started talking about the Wi-Fi issue. But you're absolutely right, and that's why that litigation is really important. And lawyers need to understand this. Do you love your children? Do you love your wife? Do you love your parents? Because they better think about this too. This is killing them. It's killing their parents. It's killing all the above. And this static discharge thing I talk about, setting off explosions. I got a call out of Ontario from a building construction guy and a manager. And we started talking, and I started to laugh, and he said, this isn't funny. And you know what he was talking about? The power density was so high, he said, my parents are walking across the floor, and they're discharging and getting shocks through their feet. Ooh. And I laughed, and I said, oh, my God. And he said, it's not funny? I said, of course it's not funny. And he said, I can take my hands and brush them across the blanket, and you can see the sparks. Ooh. And here's the important part, too. There is no place to hide. There is no Faraday's cage that's going to save you. This stuff has to stop. Those frequencies are illegal as applied. And here's something with churches, and here's a shameful thing we've done. Going to churches and saying, listen, we can put this tower, the cell phone antenna tower, inside your church, and therefore you can collect some revenues. Well, here are people, here's a church doing this without understanding, here is this assault on creation. It doesn't matter what your belief is. It doesn't matter what you believe in. Here is this assault on creation and everything on the planet. And when the people said the meek shall inherit the earth, I said, they're not going to be walking upright.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a horrible thing to even represent that scientifically. And again, it just never should have happened. But that's what happens when we, quite frankly, and here's with North Americans too, and I accept this as well. North Americans are so fat and lazy. And when I say fat and lazy, it's not just talking about a body type. It's talking about when we had our election in the Okanagan this last year. I don't know what measly little percentage showed up to vote, where people in other countries are dying for that opportunity and being blown up while they're trying to just get that opportunity to vote. And it's the same thing, listen, we've just become so complacent without understanding, listen, we're in a lot of trouble. And it's got to be dealt with, or guess what? And here's the thing, too. If people go, listen, I've got a lot of money, I've got a lot of this. If anybody owns it, now I actually responded to this because in New York, I think they said Sotheby's sets a record and sells auctions off $650 million in paintings. Listen, you can have a Picasso, and guess what? These radio frequencies going through that Picasso and into your house and into your building or wherever you are, guess what? Your Picasso is going to turn into dust. It doesn't matter about the wealth. It doesn't matter what it is. And even for museums, to be called by an archaeologist saying, what is this doing to your museum? And I said, oh, my God. I said, I never thought about that. You're going to cause accelerated corrosion of the museum, never mind the artifacts inside that museum. So it's just, it's all-encompassing. Here Diane, called me and said, Curtis, what about nuclear power plants? And I said, oh, my God. I said, you're going to cause accelerated corrosion of that infrastructure, of the building. You're going to interfere with the people in there. And I said, then you're going to have these EMFs bouncing off things in there, causing unrealized damage in a nuclear power plant.
And the core isn't in an MRI chamber, is it?
Well, no, and that's what I mean. It is just so dangerous. This is why, as electrical professionals, my whole career was this. If somebody came up to me and said, I want to use wireless, I would say, show me how you want to use it. And here, the only acceptable thing for me is a guy wanted to do like a television remote control where I want this to go from here to here 10 feet. That's all. I said, I'm good with that. That's all you can do. You cannot blast EMFs around like that.
No more car door opener signals going through my body.
Well, and people when you think of an EMF trigger, when we talk about that, like opening your garage door, opening your car door from a distance, starting your car up and doing those things. But here's that reality and that liability, and we've talked about this. People that are hit and hurt by these things have lawsuits. They have them right now, and it's really unfortunate because, here in Ontario, when they said, Curtis, you can't say there's trillions of dollars in damage. Well, take Ontario, 4.8 million buildings compromised. How much math do you have to do per building to turn that into a $1 trillion issue?
There's even other issues, such as what you've mentioned before. The utility didn't climb the pole and disconnect the house from the supply before they changed the meter.
Well, and that's the thing too with that. And again, I've attended 2 meter installations, watching them swap out the meter, and what they did is horrific. Under no circumstances would you do what they've done, and we would never allow these unqualified people to swap out those meters the way they did. So you've got real fire issues for real. In like California with the meters blowing off the sides of the building because of a power surge coming back along the lines. These connections that they haven't maintained are causing the fires in the meter base, and the meter is burning. And that stuff is burning. It's just not necessarily the components of the meter itself. So it's just, imagine this, where here's a real economy, because in Ontario, as an example, you've got 4.8 million meters that have to be reinstalled, and meter bases that have to be reinspected, and buildings that have to be taken a look at. It's just really created a mess.
Mm-hmm. There's one little point called the ALARA principle that I heard Dr. Martin Blank present personally, I think quite a number of years ago, 9 or 10 years ago, when the bioinitiative report was first new. And he had a proposition that was never put forward to the community of people who are exhibiting symptoms of subtle electrocution, called the ALARA principle, that government should have the right to draw a line in the sand of who lives and who doesn't live. Where do you stand on that, Curtis?
Listen, government doesn't have any. Listen, here's the thing with governments. These are supposed to be governments of the people for the people, not for any elitists or political parties to make those decisions. You know, those are elected officials to supposedly to be doing a job. So again, you know, that's a sad thing that we've gotten away from. Is my father reminded me at a very young age, and there was a granary in Alberta, and on the side of the granary it said, "What should it do a man to gain the world but lose his soul?" And I asked my father, I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "Service before self." You know, and that's what these guys are supposed to be doing as elected officials. Service before self, not the other way around.
So your position is that every life is to be protected, and the safety standards, the way you see them, is inclusive of everyone.
Absolutely. Who has that right to determine that? And again, I'm not going to get into those things of doctor-assisted suicide or doing those types of things. And again, because I've been in those situations where I've known people that were just hurting so bad in doing those types of things. Those are decisions that that need to be made by still people themselves, not for governments or anybody to determine who needs to be here and who doesn't need to be here. There's other things that can determine that.
And then there's the possibility that they've made a misdiagnosis and somebody's life could be recovered.
Well, here's the thing with medicine, and here again is with this incredibly advanced work that the Integrative Health Forum does. This is the only medical program in the world that actually shows non-thermal effects, shows energy in the infrared spectrum, whether it pertains to, all of these environmental issues, because at the end of the day, everything we do environmentally, cycles through our bodies. It is what it is. So, and again, one of my biggest frustrations with medicine and these great professionals I worked with is when they questioned me and said, "How did you see this?" And I said, "How can you not?" I said, "You guys," I said, "inflammation's your business." I said, "But you can't see it." And they said, "No." And I said, "That just makes me angry." I said, "I can't even imagine being a blind electrician. You're not going to last a long time." So the idea that medicine was blind, so the nicest part about even that accredited medical education program and those advancements in medicine is that difficult diagnosis can be seen. Non-thermal effects can be seen. Wireless radiation damage can be seen, has been seen. It's really not rocket science. And it's even horrific to participate in this process in clinical environments and to be able to see this and substantiate it, but most importantly, give medicine sight of their objectives so they can be accountable as well and just get the job done. And again, it was Dr. Lynch that he said, "You're frustrated with us," and I said, "Yes, I'm very frustrated with you." And he said, "We get 15 minutes. We get paid for 15 minutes to diagnose a patient." He said, "We don't get paid anything to do this." He said, "We're paid peanuts." He said, "We have to become a corporation to justify ourselves instead of being paid for our work." And he said, "Try to imagine diagnosing somebody and all their troubles, in such a short period of time." And he's absolutely right. That should have never happened. We should have allowed medical professionals to be, people of medicine, not where they get paid. Here's not where they get paid for these issues. Now, here's an example here. I've got a firefighter buddy here that has had his own health challenges, and he said he's had 10 CAT scans. Well, this was going on. A CAT scan is equivalent to 750 X-rays.
Quite a bit.
So he's had 7,500 X-rays, and now they want him to go for another one. And he said to them, "What did you do with the first 10? And here's the thing is, we've turned it into a revenue. They get to bill for it. Hey, go for an X-ray. Hey, go for some imaging. Hey, go for this. And you know what? One X-ray is invasive, as important as they are sometimes. But here's another thing too. In listening to Dr. Lynch lecture in medicine, as well as people that have asked to be trained. A nurse out of Prince George said, "Do you guys train anybody?" And we said, "No." And we said, "What's your interest?" And she said, "People in this hospital are dying from cancer, and that's not why they came in here. We're X-raying them to death." And Dr. Lynch said this, "I feel sorry for women of mammogram age." He said, because while we're looking for cancer, we're going to give it to you. And that's, again, the importance of advancing non-invasive radiology to be that complement, because the youngest girl to have a breast removed from breast cancer is 4, and she was in Ontario. And thank goodness, her doctors were that progressive that they found it and picked it up. But imagine that doctor, they're going to be using this advanced non-invasive radiology and see it immediately, so they can refer it to their peers, and we can just give these guys sight of their objectives.
Great. We have 2 entries in the chat room in the lower half of the screen. Can you see it there, Curtis, on the dashboard?
No.
There's a chat room. I'll read it to you. Deanna Munson says, "Thank you from the bottom of my heart, Curtis, but I have to turn off this phone now. I can barely think. There are no landlines here. 4G cell is all I have. Thanks."
And it's horrible because, and again, even with phones, guess what? You have to have landlines. And Deanna's another one that's just dear to my heart for these things because, here are all these real challenges associated with this, and while they're being ignored and effectively radiated. So it's just disgraceful. But more importantly is, guess what? The powers that be are going to be jumping into this for what it really means, and we got to stop this nonsense.
Good. Cheryl has a question here. What are the qualifications for these persons whom are calling from ComEd in Illinois that are calling residents telling them that they are wrong with their information on smart meters?
They don't have any qualifications, or they wouldn't be talking like that. Now, and here's an example of this. You got a lot of people being told that, here's a thing again. You would think that the employees at ComEd would be told the truth on these issues. So when they get people calling up and saying, listen, we got problems and this is what's going on with us, these guys go, no, that's not possible. It's the same thing even with the Fortis BC application when I attended these meter swaps. Imagine this. The guy doing swapping the meters has got 5 months training, 4 or 5 months training. Well, guess what? I wouldn't allow my apprentice with 4 or 5 months training to touch anything live, let alone do work like that. So these people that are dismissing her, listen, it shouldn't happen. And here's something else as well. And she said something else that they're saying they're health workers,
yes,
health experts or whatever. Good. Here's an important part with that. What she needs to do with that is, listen, you ask people, because here's the thing with me too, where I've had some people contact me and say, okay, Curtis, I'm an anonymous professional. I don't want to tell you who I am or what my credentials are, but I know a lot. Well, that just doesn't fly. So what I would tell Cheryl to do is this. Anybody on the phone, and especially when they work for a company, 1, you ask them for their ID number because you want a receipt. 2, when they say they're medical experts, you ask them what type of medical expert they are and their credentials. Then you can also say to them, I would like to talk to your supervisor to verify those credentials. Now, and the other thing, too, is if they're saying they're health experts, Cheryl can pass on that letter that the dangers of these technologies is lectured in accredited medical education. Now, for education credits, those health experts require for ongoing licensing, and it changes their opinion immediately for ComEd as well. And is that out of Michigan, I think?
It says
Michigan or Maine?
It says Illinois.
Well, that's the same thing, that whole group. And guess what? These guys, again, these experts have to name themselves. And that's why even for me, some people said, hey, this is about me. And I said, no, I can't be an anonymous professional. You have to step up and represent what you are. And Cheryl, they would have to do the same. And Cheryl, I'd like you to get that information and even share that with me too, because I would like to help you with that, because it's despicable. Even what's going on in Illinois. So if you can get a hold of even Diane and get that information to them, we would look forward to helping you, including giving information to these health workers.
Cheryl,
Cheryl, listen, here's again, it just breaks my heart that you should even have to go through that at all, and you don't have to thank me for doing my job. Parents are doing their jobs every day First responders are doing their jobs every day. It is what it is, and we're just members of teams. We're just not supposed to compromise ourselves. Professionals, under no circumstances, should compromise themselves. And I've actually lectured this in medical education. I said, if you're a professional and you compromise the integrity of what you are, you don't have a right to call yourself a professional. You should lose your credentials.
Right. Talking about harming first responders, we've had 30 responder suicides in Canada in 2015. And can you attribute the EMFs from the radiofrequency microwave radiation communication devices of the responders as affecting?
It's you know what you said there is very sad. Now, first off, I want to say this too. That Cheryl said. First, I want to do this. Cheryl said that she started Stop Meter, Illinois. That's why I want to get this information to her, because here's the best part for Cheryl. We will technically back her up and medically back her up and stop meters in Illinois, and we will deal with these weenies for what they're doing. So I'll look forward to talking to you about that, and we'll give you some people that will help you as well. And when it comes to the first responders, Diane, here's what shocked me as well. You had brought it to my attention about, here were there 26 suicides or something in Ontario, first responders, and these are policemen, firemen, these guys with decades of experience. And here, imagine now, they're just talking about the suicides of first responders in Vancouver. Well, these guys are sitting inside those vehicles, and on top of the vehicle is an antenna, where these guys said, hey, Curtis, this is just a 2-watt antenna. Listen, those EMFs are going through those windows, and they're bouncing around through that vehicle and hitting these guys from head to toe. And it is the safety exposure codes and safety code 6 that says, this can stimulate and trigger nerves. Well, you imagine your nerves, and again, I say this very generically because I said to doctors, I said, what does your nervous system do? And they said, that's your body's electrical system. So imagine, I said, could you stop a heart? Yes. Could you stop people from breathing with nerve? Yes, and yes. So the fact that they're neurologically interfering with these first responders and affecting them where they're even thinking is changing that mood, changing their nervous and hormonal and immune systems. It's just disgusting. And that's another thing, too. They need to be protected, and they're not. And we've got these guys to do this very important job. And here's something else that you bring up a very important point here. What do you think lawyers are going to do if they had this option to say today? If they said to me, and here I've actually had this happen where I told the lawyer, I said, don't ever call me to provide an excuse for somebody doing a crime. And then guess what? I get a call from a lawyer, and he said, Curtis, a policeman killed some people. And he's never been like this. He's got no record. He's got no anything, and all of a sudden he just lost it. Well, are we going to give an excuse for crime? And then what does that mean? Everybody in prison can say, hey, was I neurologically interfered with by these EMFs? Yes. Can that give me an excuse for my crimes? Well, can't it? We have to be very careful with what we're doing for all reasons in the world. And again, first responders, it just breaks my heart to hear about these guys doing what they're doing, because, they just, they don't go, here, imagine first responders that I've worked with that, when they've gone to calls and they've lost children and lost babies, and there aren't any words. There aren't any words for how they feel with what is a failure on their part. So some of them just weep. There's nothing you can say. There's nothing you can do. They don't. They're just, the job they have is so tough as it is, let alone neurologically interfering with them, and maybe even interfering with their capabilities of doing their job. So first responders need to know this too. Yes, you are being adversely affected by these EMFs. You're in your cruisers. You're in your fire trucks, where even a policeman came to me, and this would be interesting. He said, I have cancer in my hand because of my radar gun, because they shoot out that beam and it comes back at their vehicle. And they said, would you be able to see it? And I said, of course you would. So we're looking forward to helping like any part of that. They just need to know more, and that the government effectively undermined them as well. And again, I say that with all respect to intent. The government isn't all bad people. There's a lot of great professionals there. Unfortunately, when you've got weak leadership, it's just horrible. And look at Prime Minister Harper. Aren't they investigating 10 or 11 senators? And the Prime Minister's office pays off Duffy, but they've somehow put that aside so it's not going to interfere with them during the election or something. It's just disgraceful. And even the idea when they say, "Listen, we got millions of dollars. We're gonna put millions to this and millions to this." Those are tax-paying dollars, not political dollars.
Right. Cheryl's typed in another message here. I've been hearing about virus caused by smart meters. Do you have any information on this issue?
Absolutely. You think of that domino effect of here's what I've said to I've said this to medical professionals. I've even said this to industry workers. And I would say this to you. What would happen if your nervous, hormonal, and immune systems are compromised at the same time? Yeah, you're going to open your body up to anything and everything, including viruses. Mm-hmm. So, can say this with Cheryl, too. Listen, I'd look forward to hearing about even the virus issue because, something we do in medical education as well as, there's some amazing things out there with products that are virucidal, bactericidal, and some things that might be able to help with some of these issues. But I'd sure like to hear more about, a specific virus and what part of the body it's going after, and just getting some more technical information about that. So Cheryl, again, our website is thermoguy.com, THERMOGUY.com. And if you just send an email or get a hold of, you at Stand the Truth, listen, pass on that information, and we'll look forward to. And tell Cheryl, she just wrote thank you, and tell Cheryl, listen, you're welcome, and we're really just doing our job, and it's just shameful that we should even have to have this discussion. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you what, the Auditor Generals are not going to be laughing. The Attorney Generals and the policing arms are not going to be laughing. It's just not funny what's happened. Yeah. Here's something for real. And again, I don't get into conspiracies of any particular kind. But, one engineer said to me, do you believe that they reversed alien technology or reverse engineered it? And I said, here's what I would say to you. I said, 100 years ago, we could barely fly. I said, so are we playing around with technologies that we shouldn't even be touching? Who knows? Because they won't tell us the truth in these issues. But again, you can't do this because it is a frequency and biological weapon is applied.
We're going to shut it down.
Okay. It's going to be a long recording. But again, worth it for the education for everybody. And Diane, I want to thank you so much, and for people out there. And tell you this, listen, I've never met Diane, but she's just always stepped forward. I know that they have their own struggles, and she's done this on a shoestring budget without the shoes. So Diane, I have to compliment you on your work and your media and for everything you've done and your leadership. Because leaders lead from the front, and that needs to be admired anytime.
Well, I'm looking up to you all the time, Curtis. You're setting the example for me.
That's because I'm tall.
Yeah, in more than one way.
No, just again, I thank goodness for my father, and again, you can't tell boys much of anything, but my father always just said this: how would you want your mother represented? How do you want your family to be represented, and putting in those questions, and how do you want, how important is your professional integrity? And, that's where it's just most important because, you can't compromise science without exception. It's just my job.
Yeah, you've been there for me. Whenever I have an issue, I can call you up day or night, and I'll get an answer. No, you got to say this or you're liable, You're there.
Well, and here I get back to that issue that if somebody calls if somebody calls an applicable professional, and for that applicable professional to say, listen, I'm too busy right now for what might be an emergency to you. I wouldn't want somebody telling my mother, listen, I don't have time for you. I don't have time for those things. And more importantly is, listen, you got to do more than just talk the talk. You got to walk the walk.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed where is Derek Ward come on to this call or not yet?
No, we're missing him in action.
Derek, when you get to watch this, I hope, I miss you. I'm really kidding with that. I'm really kidding with that.
We've got some good people here.
Listen, you got good people, and it's going to be, like I say, the recording, and people will be able to share it, and there's just lots going on with this. So listen, I'll just say this to you. You conclude this, and everybody take good care. And
everyone's unmuted now.
Okay. Everybody take good care and understand there's lots going on, okay? And Sandy, I see you in there as well.
This was Lynn.
Susan.
Thank you very much.
There's a Susan in there, but there's also a Sandy F in there, too. And I'm wondering if that's Sandy Fields.
It would seem so.
It would seem so, but Susan and all of you, listen, I want to thank you so much, even for attending. And don't take, just a few people being on this call as for anything less than what it is. This was done last minute, and lots of people will be listening to this. You'll be able to share this for education, and people are looking for that information for all reasons in the world. And again, hard to simplify, 10,000 hours of work related to this, but there's just much more happening, and we'll be sharing that information soon. So you take good care, and everybody a safe day, and know that we're working for you, okay? Know that there's a lot of great and wonderful people out there working for you. They were just missing some information, and that's coming forward, okay?
Thank you, Curtis. Thank you for all your expertise. Maybe maybe we'll all be able to use you in a court case or something one of these days.
Well, here you can. And here's the thing as well. You can listen. Medical education is on your side. The science is on your side. We're not lobbyists. We didn't pick sides. So when I've been asked, to provide expert witness or doing those types of things, that just is what it is, and it needs to be done, and that needs to be substantiated for real. And again, when lawyers have said to me, Curtis, I don't believe what you say, and I said, you're a lawyer. You're not electrically qualified in an opinion. And it's just that simple for that part of it. So, we're not going to get technically overwhelmed, and again, over all these years, or 5 years, listen, the sad thing is we haven't been technically overwhelmed by anybody in any industry, and that just speaks for itself because they should have stepped forward and beat us up.
Well, they can't.
Technically.
They can't.
Well, science is science. Electricity is electricity. Engineering is engineering.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys take good care, and we'll be talking later. Okay, safe days, and know that lots is going on, okay? Thank you for attending. And Diane, thanks again.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you, Curtis.